Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? The feeling of being watched, it's a peculiar sensation. At first, it's just a whisper, a nagging thought at the back of your mind. But when it grows, when it becomes undeniable, you'll never forget the panic that shoots through you, like an electric current to the spine. Lena had never been a paranoid person. She prided herself on her grounded, logical mindset. But that night, something changed. Something inside her had shifted, and she would never be the same again. It started innocently enough, as things always do. A lingering glance here, a shadow in the corner of her vision there. She lived in a small, quiet town, the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was the sort of place where you could leave your front door unlocked at night and not think twice about it. Lena had always felt safe. She had friends, a solid job, and a nice apartment. She didn't feel like a person who would be stalked. But that, too, was the problem. It's always the ones you least suspect. The first time she noticed him was during her morning jog. It wasn't a strange encounter at first. He was just another person in the park, sitting on the bench, his eyes trained on his phone. She passed him as she always did, sweating slightly from the run, feeling the wind tug at her hair. It wasn't until she looped back around, a few minutes later, that she saw him again. He was still sitting there, still staring at his phone. Lena frowned, confusion lacing her thoughts. Was he really just waiting for her to pass by again? She shook it off. The world was full of odd people, after all. There was no harm in it. But as she ran past him once more, she caught a glimpse of something in the corner of her eye. He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. His gaze was fixed straight ahead, right at her. And it didn't feel like a casual glance. It felt like he was waiting. That was the moment the unease began to creep in. For the next few days, it was the same. He appeared at the park at the exact same time, always sitting on the same bench. Sometimes he had his phone out, other times he didn't. It was almost as if he were deliberately trying to get her attention without doing anything too obvious. Lena didn't know how to explain it, but something about the way he watched her made her skin crawl. She started running a different route. She moved her jog to the other side of town, figuring that would be enough to avoid the creepy stranger. But as the days passed, she realized he was always around. It wasn't just at the park anymore. The coffee shop, the grocery store, the sidewalk outside her apartment building. He was there. She noticed it in the way he never seemed to speak to anyone, never interacted with the world around him. He simply watched. And in that watching, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that he was becoming more and more familiar with her life. The places she went, the time she left her apartment, the exact way she tied her shoes when she went running. It was like he was learning everything about her without her ever speaking a word. Her paranoia grew. It wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was becoming a reality. There was no way this could all be coincidence, right? No way he could just happen to be everywhere she was, every single time. And then came the night she would never forget. Lena had just finished work late one evening, tired but determined to make it to the store before closing time. She hadn't been able to shake the gnawing sensation in the back of her mind, the one that told her to stay alert. But, like any good skeptic, she pushed it aside. After all, she wasn't some damsel in distress. She was just a regular person. She didn't need to be afraid of some stranger. She entered the store, the bell above the door jingling softly as she walked through. The shelves were stocked with everything she needed, and she made her way to the back, grabbing a carton of milk and a loaf of bread. It wasn't until she turned the corner and walked down an aisle near the refrigerated section that she saw him again. This time, He wasn't sitting, he was standing. Right at the end of the aisle, just barely visible, as though he were waiting for her. His face was hidden in shadow, but his eyes, those cold, empty eyes, were unmistakable. They were watching her. And this time, there was no mistaking it. Her heart skipped a beat, her blood ran cold. She took a step back, hoping she was just imagining things, but the sensation, the weight of those eyes, was suffocating. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was fear. She froze, standing motionless for a few seconds, trying to figure out what to do. Should she run? Should she call someone? But no, she was alone. The store was nearly empty, and she didn't want to make a scene. She moved quickly, trying to stay calm, her breathing shallow. She could feel him following her with his eyes as she made her way toward the checkout counter, every step weighed down by the tension building in her chest. The cashier, a young woman with a bored expression, didn't seem to notice the stranger. But Lena did. He was still there, lingering just beyond the end of the aisle. His gaze locked onto her as though it were the only thing that mattered in the world. "Mom." The cashier's voice broke through the haze of panic in Lena's mind. "Are you okay?" Lena forced a smile, her voice shaking just a little. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little tired." She grabbed her groceries, paid quickly, and left the store, her eyes darting back over her shoulder to make sure he wasn't following. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. It wasn't until she reached the parking lot and got into her car that she allowed herself to take a breath. She locked the doors, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. The headlights flickered on, illuminating the empty parking lot. But something was different. She could still feel it. The sensation that someone, somewhere, was watching her. The next few nights passed uneventfully, and Lena tried to push the lingering dread from her thoughts. Maybe it had been a fluke. Maybe she was overreacting. She even convinced herself to return to the park. Perhaps the stranger had simply been a weird, but harmless, part of her routine. But as she ran, a new sensation began to creep in, something that made her stop dead in her tracks. The air had grown still, too still. She glanced over her shoulder. There he was, standing at the same bench, staring at her. His eyes were fixed on her once again, but this time they seemed different, more intense, more focused. He wasn't looking at her like a person anymore. He was studying her, observing her every movement, analyzing her every step. Lena's breath hitched. She turned and ran in the opposite direction, her legs pumping furiously, heart racing. But no matter how fast she went, the feeling of his eyes never left her. The chill that had started in her chest now radiated outward, spreading through her entire body. She had to get away. But there was nowhere to run. He was always there. And the worst part, she knew he was learning everything about her. Everything. Every night, Sarah checked the locks, 3 deadbolts on the front door, an alarm system that beeped in warning whenever a window was ajar, and motion sensor lights on the outside of her house. These precautions weren't out of paranoia. They were born from experience. She lived alone, and after months of unsettling events, her home had become more of a prison than a sanctuary. The night began like any other. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sounds of traffic on the nearby highway, the rustling of the trees outside as a light breeze swept through them. Sarah had grown used to the silence of her home, and yet tonight something felt different. A chill that hadn't been there before settled in her bones. She rubbed her arms, willing herself to relax as she made her way to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The sharp clang of the knife against the cutting board echoed louder than it should have, making Sarah flinch. She paused, staring out the window, her eyes narrowing. The shadow of a man seemed to pass through her yard, too tall, too sudden. Her heart skipped. No, it was just the trees swaying in the wind. But still, the unease lingered. She shook her head, trying to push away the feeling that had settled deep in her gut. For weeks, it had been like this. Something was always just out of sight, just beyond her ability to grasp. She'd hear faint footsteps in the hallway at night, see a figure standing in the corner of her vision, then turn to find nothing there. Sometimes, when she was about to fall asleep, she could feel a presence just outside her door. The stalker had been clever at first. They'd started with small things. Scratches on her doorframe, a note left in her mailbox, the occasional flicker of a shadow outside her windows. At first, she thought it was a prank. But as the weeks went on, the things she couldn't explain started to add up. She had contacted the police, of course, but they'd found nothing. The security footage from her home had shown nothing but the passing of time. No intruder, no evidence, just her own reflection on the monitor. Maybe it's all in my head, she whispered to herself, but the words felt empty. She could no longer convince herself that everything was normal. Her phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text message from an unknown number. "I'm watching you." Her stomach dropped, and the knife in her hand slipped, cutting a small gash into her palm. Blood welled up quickly, the sharp sting breaking through her panic. She clutched her hand, pressing it against her side to stop the bleeding, her eyes wide as she stared at the message. Who was this? Could it be a joke? No, not after everything that had been happening. Her hands trembled as she typed a response, her fingers reluctant to even press the keys. "Who is this? What do you want?" The reply came within seconds. "I want to see you." The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stood up as she read the words again. The tone of the message, the chilling simplicity of it, sent a wave of cold terror through her. Whoever was sending these messages wasn't just playing a game. They were making it clear that they were watching her, learning her patterns. Getting closer with every passing day, she glanced around the room, as though expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. The silence was suffocating. Her thoughts raced. Who could it be? A former acquaintance. An ex-boyfriend. But she couldn't think of anyone who would have the means, or the obsession, to stalk her like this. Suddenly, the faintest sound broke through the quiet. It was a soft scraping noise, like something brushing against the window. Sarah froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her heart hammered in her chest. She glanced over at the window in the kitchen, her eyes narrowing as she saw nothing but the dark outline of trees against the night sky. Yet that sound, it had come from outside. She was sure of it. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate. It was like the sound of fingernails dragging across glass. Her legs felt like lead as she took a hesitant step toward the window, her mind screaming at her to stay away. The motion, sensor light outside the house flickered, and she held her breath, her hand still pressed tightly against her side to stop the bleeding. She reached for the curtain, the fabric cold against her fingers, and pulled it back just enough to peer through. Her breath hitched in her throat as her gaze swept across the yard. The shadows stretched long, and for a moment she thought she saw nothing at all. Then, from the corner of her eye, something moved. A figure barely visible in the dark. It was a man, standing just outside the reach of the light, his face obscured by the shadows. She recoiled, her pulse racing. The scraping stopped, and then the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, closer, closer still. Sarah backed away from the window, her body trembling with fear. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Was it him? Was it the stalker who had been tormenting her for months? Without thinking, she rushed toward the hallway and grabbed the phone off the charger. Her fingers fumbled as she dialed the police, her voice shaky as she spoke. "Please, a help. Someone's outside my house. I think they're trying to get in." But the line went dead before she could finish. The call had been cut off. Panic surged through her as she checked her phone, trying to dial again. Nothing. The signal was gone. The footsteps outside stopped. Silence. And then, knock, knock, knock. The sound of someone knocking at her front door. She couldn't move. Her body felt frozen in place as the knock came again, louder this time. A third time, harder, as if the person on the other side of the door wanted her to hear the force behind it. She glanced toward the door, her mind whirling with fear. There was no way she was going to open it. No way she was going to face whatever, or whoever, was out there. But the knocking didn't stop. It continued, becoming more insistent, more desperate, until it sounded like it was coming from every direction at once. The door, the window, the walls. Then, a voice, low, mocking, familiar. "Let me in, Sarah." Her heart nearly stopped. That voice. She knew that voice. It couldn't be. The figure outside the window reappeared, but this time, the shadow didn't stand still. It moved, circling the house, like it knew exactly where she was, like it could feel her every step. "Why are you hiding?" The voice crooned, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was Jason, her ex. The one who had disappeared 6 months ago without a trace. The one she had thought was gone for good. But now, he was back, and he was never going to leave. Sarah's pulse thudded in her ears, drowning out every other sound in the house. The voice outside her window, Jason's voice, sounded almost like a twisted mockery of the man she had once known. But this wasn't the Jason she remembered. This was something far darker, something that had taken his place. The knock at the door echoed through the house again, this time louder, like it had shifted from a simple request to a demand. "Let me in, Sarah," he said, his voice low and insistent, yet strangely calm. Too calm, too calculated. It didn't sound like a man who had once loved her, but like a predator toying with its prey. Her breath was ragged, her body frozen in fear. She stepped back from the door, her heart hammering in her chest. Jason had vanished 6 months ago, leaving nothing but a trail of unanswered questions. No one knew where he had gone or why. But now, somehow, he was here, standing on the other side of her front door, trying to break his way back into her life. She glanced at the window, the shadow of a man still lingering just outside, shifting between the trees like a ghost. He wasn't just watching her. He was studying her. She could feel his eyes on her, even through the thick darkness of the night. Her hands shook as she picked up her phone again, hoping to get through to the police. The signal was still dead. Panic surged, and for a moment, her mind began to spiral. She could hear Jason's voice growing louder, his knocks becoming more forceful. Each strike against the door sounded like it was chipping away at her resolve, tearing down the walls she had spent so long building. She couldn't hide forever. She needed to do something, anything, before he got inside. Her gaze flickered to the back door, the only other exit from the house. The thought of running, of escaping, twisted in her mind. But where would she go? She didn't even know if Jason was the only one out there. What if there were more? What if this was just a trap to lure her out into the open? Sarah's legs wobbled beneath her, but she forced herself to move toward the back door. She didn't have time to think. If she stayed here, she'd be trapped. She grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. Her heart sank. She hadn't locked it earlier, she was sure of it. Panic rose in her chest as she scrambled for the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could hardly grip them. It was as if the house itself was turning against her. Just then, another knock sounded from the front door. This one wasn't just loud. It was sharp, brutal. A crack sounded through the wood, as if something had struck it with unimaginable force. Sarah froze. Her breath caught in her throat. That wasn't just a knock. It was a warning. And it wasn't just Jason outside anymore. Without thinking, she backed away from the door, her mind racing. There was no time left. Jason wasn't just standing outside anymore. He was trying to break in. Then, Through the fog of panic and fear, something else pierced the stillness. A voice, muffled and faint, but unmistakable. "Sarah, I know you're in there." She spun toward the sound, but there was no one there. No one standing behind her. No one watching from the shadows. The voice had come from inside the house. Her stomach dropped, her blood running cold. The words echoed in her head, reverberating through her thoughts. How? How could anyone know she was here? She was alone. She had been alone all evening, hadn't she? And then, another realization hit her like a punch to the gut. The knocking. The voice. The figure she had seen outside the window. They weren't just trying to get in, they were already in. A soft creak broke the silence. The floorboard beneath her feet shifted. Her breath quickened, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Someone was upstairs. She didn't wait to find out who. In one swift movement, she rushed toward the staircase. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to leave, to find safety. But she had to be sure. She had to know who, or what, was up there. Her footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet as she ascended the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. The house seemed to close in around her, the walls closing tighter. The air thick with the sense of being watched. The hallway at the top of the stairs was dark, the faintest glow from the streetlights outside casting long shadows across the walls. Sarah felt the cold draft as she crept toward the door of her bedroom. There was a faint sound inside. The rustle of fabric, the softest whisper of breath. She didn't even knock. She flung the door open, the hinges creaking in protest. Her eyes immediately shot to the far corner of the room, where the shape of a person stood, barely visible in the dim light. A tall, thin figure hunched over, as though trying to remain unnoticed. But Sarah saw them clearly. Jason. But this wasn't the man she had once known. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and stretched tight over the bones of his skull. His eyes were hollow, darkened to the point where they seemed almost like empty sockets. His hair was wild, matted with dirt and something darker. He wasn't alone. There, just behind him, another figure stood, an identical replica of Jason. Same height, same build, but with eyes that burned with an unnatural red glow. Before Sarah could react, the first Jason took a step toward her, his lips curling into a twisted smile. The stench of decay and rot hit her like a slap to the face, the overpowering odor making her stomach churn. "Did you miss me?" he whispered, his voice low and haunting. It wasn't just the words that made her skin crawl. It was the tone, the way he said it like he was savoring her fear. Her mouth went dry. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was stare, frozen in place as the two figures slowly advanced toward her. She took a step back, then another. They followed, their movements slow and deliberate. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. There was no escape. There was no place to run. "Don't worry, Sarah," Jason's voice echoed. "You'll come back to me. You always do." Then, with an unsettling twist of his neck, he grinned wide. A grin too wide, too unnatural. And this time, "You'll never leave." Before she could scream, the world went black. The silence was oppressive. Sarah stood in the clearing, her legs trembling beneath her as she scanned the woods around her. The trees loomed like dark giants, their thick trunks reaching up into the night sky, casting long, twisted shadows on the ground. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, but it didn't bring her comfort. It felt wrong, as though the very forest was alive, watching her every move. She swallowed hard, the taste of fear bitter in her mouth. Every part of her screamed to run, to get out of there, but her feet wouldn't move. She was frozen, caught in the grip of something she couldn't name, a sense of impending doom that curled around her like a tightening noose. Snap. The sound was faint, but it sent a shock through her body. Her head whipped around, searching the shadows. She hadn't imagined it. Something, no, someone, was out there. Her pulse quickened. She took a cautious step backward, her eyes darting around the clearing. The darkness seemed to close in on her from all sides, and with each passing second, it felt as though the trees themselves were shifting, moving closer, pressing in around her. Then, she heard it again, a soft whisper. No, not a whisper. It was more like a hum, an eerie, low murmur that seemed to come from all directions at once. Sarah. The voice was faint but unmistakable. She knew that voice. It was hers, her own voice. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling as she strained to hear anything over the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Is someone there?" Silence. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping with each passing second. The shadows around her deepened, swirling as if alive. The trees creaked and groaned in the breeze, their limbs twisting and turning like bony fingers reaching for her. Snap, crack, a rustle of leaves. A figure emerged from the shadows, a silhouette at first, then gradually becoming clearer in the dim light. It was a man, a tall figure, his face hidden beneath the hood of a thick, dark cloak. His body was hunched, his steps slow, deliberate, as though he was watching her, waiting for her to make the first move. Her breath caught in her throat as the figure took another step forward, then another, the echo of his boots crunching on the forest floor too loud in the otherwise still night. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her body was stiff with fear, her instincts screaming at her to run, but she couldn't bring herself to look away. The figure stopped just out of arm's reach, his face still hidden in the shadows of his cloak. For a long moment, there was nothing but the eerie silence, the hum of the wind through the trees, and the sound of Sarah's ragged breathing. Then, finally, the figure spoke. "I am what you fear." His voice was low, gravelly, as if he hadn't spoken in years. It wasn't just his words, though. There was something about his voice, something in the way he said those words, that made Sarah's blood run cold. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What you fear." Before she could respond, the figure stepped forward again, and with a swift, fluid motion, he pulled back his hood. His face was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. His skin was smooth and unblemished, but his features were sharp, too sharp, and his lips curled into a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sarah." The way he said her name sent a jolt of terror through her, as though he knew her, as though he had been watching her for far longer than she realized. Her mouth went dry. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice quivering. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes flicked over her face, lingering for a moment on the deepening shadows beneath her eyes, the tension in her expression. His smile widened. "You don't remember, do you?" he asked, tilting his head to the side. "You don't remember me." Sarah's mind raced, trying to place his face, but it was like trying to recall a dream that slipped through her fingers the moment she woke. She shook her head, her thoughts a blur. "I don't know you," she whispered. The man's grin faded slightly, but there was something in his eyes. Something dark, something ancient, that made her feel as if she were looking into a void that had known her long before she had ever set foot in these woods. "You will," he said softly, his voice almost a sigh. "You will remember." Suddenly, the air grew thick, oppressive, as if the forest itself had drawn in a deep breath. The ground beneath Sarah's feet shifted, and for a split second, she thought she felt the earth itself tremble. The man reached out with one long, pale hand, his fingers curling toward her as if he were trying to touch her, to pull her closer into his dark, suffocating presence. "Don't move." The thought came to her like a sudden command, as if the very forest was warning her. Her body froze. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the pull of his presence, but she couldn't look away. Every instinct told her to run, to flee, but something held her in place. "Sarah," the man said again, his voice growing softer. "You've been here before." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Sarah's stomach dropped. The man's words hit her like a wave, but they made no sense. She had never been here. She had never seen him before. Had she? Her heart hammered in her chest, her mind scrambling to make sense of it all. She was on the edge of panic when she heard something else. A rustling in the distance. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sound of footsteps, fast and erratic, approaching the clearing. "Sarah," the man whispered, his voice laced with an unsettling amusement. "I hope you're ready." Before she could react, the footsteps grew louder, closer. Sarah turned toward the noise, her body finally breaking free from the man's gaze. A figure emerged from the trees, stumbling into the clearing with wide, frantic eyes. "Sarah, get away from him!" the figure shouted. Its voice panicked, desperate. It was Jason, and he was running straight toward her. Jason's breath was ragged as he sprinted toward Sarah, his eyes wide with terror, his body tense. He reached out for her just as she started to back away from the cloaked figure. But his voice, desperate and filled with panic, made her freeze in place. "Sarah, get away from him!" Jason yelled, his feet barely making contact with the ground as he covered the distance between them in seconds. The man standing in the shadows, the one who had spoken her name with such eerie familiarity, turned his attention to Jason with an almost bored expression. There was no sense of urgency, no fear in the man's demeanor, only a cold, calculating calm that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "Jason," Sarah managed, her voice shaky. "What's going on? Who is this?" Jason's eyes darted from Sarah to the cloaked figure, his face pale and drawn with terror. He was clearly struggling to catch his breath, his chest rising and falling sharply as he took a step toward her. "That's," Jason stammered, trying to find the right words. "You're in danger, Sarah. He's not what he seems." The man chuckled darkly at Jason's words, a low, unsettling sound that seemed to vibrate in the air around them. "Aye," the man mused, his voice like gravel scraping over stone. "So this is the boy who's trying to keep you from remembering." "Remembering what?" Sarah asked, her mind spinning. The confusion was overwhelming. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of something huge and unknowable. Jason's desperate attempt to warn her only deepened her fear. But at the same time, the man's cryptic words twisted her thoughts into knots. "You don't remember me, do you?" the cloaked figure asked, his voice growing softer, but carrying a weight of finality. "You don't remember what you were?" Jason's hand shot out, grabbing Sarah's arm and tugging her back a step, pulling her away from the man who still stood silent and waiting. "Don't listen to him, Sarah," Jason pleaded, his grip tightening on her arm. This is wrong. You shouldn't be here. He's not real. None of this is real." Sarah's head spun. The look in Jason's eyes, fear mixed with something else, something she couldn't quite place, left her feeling more disoriented than ever. "Jason, what are you talking about?" "None of this makes sense," she said, her voice strained. The figure in front of them shifted, the shadows around him deepening as though the night itself was closing in. "Oh, but it is real, Sarah," the figure said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You've just forgotten the truth, forgotten the reason you're here." Jason pulled Sarah back another few steps, but his eyes never left the man in front of them. He was shaking, his body tense as if every instinct was telling him to run, but he didn't. "I'll explain later," Jason said, his voice low but urgent. "Just stay close, okay? Don't listen to him. I swear to you, Sarah, he's not who he says he is." The figure let out a low laugh, and the sound twisted around them like a venomous snake, echoing through the trees. His voice became almost whisper, like a breath against her ear that made Sarah shiver despite the chill in the air. "Is that really what you think, Jason? That she can escape?" He took a step forward, his cloak shifting like liquid in the shadows, and the air grew colder still. She cannot escape what's already inside of her. Sarah's heart skipped a beat at the man's words, her breath catching in her throat. What was he saying? What did he mean? Jason's face paled even more, his eyes flashing with fear and something else. Regret, maybe. But it was gone too quickly for Sarah to fully rate it. No, Jason whispered, almost to himself. I couldn't stop it before, but this time, I won't let it happen again. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the figure in front of them spoke again. You think you can stop this, Jason? You think you have the power to undo what's already been done? Sarah's head was spinning with questions, but none of them made sense. Everything, the shadows, the figure, the cryptic words, felt like a nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. The man tilted his head, his eyes glinting with something dark and knowing. It's already too late. Suddenly, the air seemed to freeze. A deep, resonating hum filled the clearing, a strange vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. Sarah's legs wobbled as the energy around them shifted, as if the very forest was alive, feeding off the tension that hung in the air. I don't understand, Sarah whispered, feeling more lost than ever. What do you want from me? The man's lips curled into a twisted smile, and his voice softened into a near inaudible murmur. I want you to remember. Sarah, I want you to remember who you are. A sudden, sharp pain shot through her skull, as though something had just been ripped open inside her mind. Her vision blurred, and she staggered back, barely keeping her balance as she gripped her forehead. The world around her tilted, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though everything had shifted. The ground beneath her feet, the trees, the very air she breathed, all of it felt like it was shifting. Sarah! Jason cried, rushing forward to catch her as she stumbled. But before he could reach her, the world around them seemed to collapse in on itself. A blinding light flashed, and for a moment, everything went dark. When Sarah opened her eyes again, everything had changed. The trees were gone, the clearing had vanished, and she was standing in the middle of a vast, empty space, the ground beneath her cracked and barren, like an ancient wasteland. Jason was gone, and the man, he was still there. But now, his eyes glowed with a bright, unnatural light. Sarah's breath came in short, ragged gasps as she stood alone in the eerie, barren landscape. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror, each thought crashing into the next without any sense of order. The bright, unnatural glow of the man's eyes sent a jolt of panic through her chest, and she could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on her. Where am I? She whispered, her voice trembling as it broke the oppressive stillness. The man's lips twisted into a cruel smile, and for a moment, it almost seemed like the landscape itself responded to his presence, shifting, bending as if alive. The air crackled with an energy Sarah couldn't comprehend, and the temperature dropped in an instant, sending a shiver down her spine. You're where you've always been, he replied, his voice almost too calm, too measured. But you'll never remember that, not until it's too late. Sarah's knees buckled beneath her, and she fell to the cracked ground, her hands landing in the dust with a sickening thud. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She had no idea where Jason had gone. One moment he was beside her, trying to protect her, and the next he was simply gone. The man's eyes glowed brighter, and he began to move toward her, his every step silent, but filled with a heavy inevitability. Each movement he made seemed to stretch the air, making everything feel suffocating and wrong. No, Sarah breathed, scrambling backward, her hands trembling as they scraped against the ground. No, I don't want this. I want to go back. Please, I want to go back! Her heart raced as the man stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in a way that made the very air seem heavy. He didn't respond right away, as though savoring her fear. Finally, he spoke again, his voice like a low rumble that echoed in her mind. "You cannot go back, Sarah. Not anymore. The door is closed. And this place is where you belong." A sob escaped her lips, her chest tight with the weight of his words. She wasn't sure what he meant, but it didn't matter. She had to escape. She had to find Jason. She had to. Stop running. The command was sharp, and for a moment, it was as if the world itself obeyed. The ground beneath Sarah's hands seemed to shift, the cracks deepening, the dust swirling around her like a vortex. She looked up, her eyes wide with terror, only to find the man standing over her now. He was no longer the figure in a cloak. Instead, he stood tall and imposing, his form shifting as if his very being was made of shadows and light. Who are you?" Sarah gasped, her voice cracking with fear. She couldn't stop the tremor in her voice, the panic that surged through her veins. The man's lips curled into a sinister grin. "You know me, Sarah. You've always known me. I've been a part of you since the beginning. But you've forgotten, haven't you?" A wave of dizziness hit Sarah as his words settled in. Forgotten? What did he mean? She didn't know him. She didn't.
"I don't know you,"
she cried, her voice breaking as she scrambled to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. The man shook his head slowly, the faintest hint of disappointment crossing his features. "That's the problem, isn't it? You've forgotten. You've forgotten who you are." "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head frantically. "No, I haven't forgotten anything."
"I don't know what you're talking about."
But the man only chuckled, a hollow sound that seemed to resonate with the very air around her. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and mocking, "you don't even realize you're trapped here, do you? This world, this place, it's all part of you. And you've been here before." Sarah's eyes widened in horror. The idea that she had been in this place before, it was too much to process. She felt the walls closing in, her breath quickening as she fought to make sense of it all. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and disbelief. "I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere like this." The man's expression darkened, and the shadows around him seemed to pulse with a malevolent force. "You belong exactly where you are. And you always will, Sarah. Because you've been here before. This is the place where it all started." Sarah shook her head, her mind spinning. What started?" The man stepped closer, his eyes now burning with a red-hot intensity. "The reason you're here, Sarah, the reason you're alive. You think this is just some dream, some nightmare. But this is your reality. I'm not." Sarah gasped, struggling to breathe as the weight of his words hit her like a physical blow. She felt as though her body was being torn apart from the inside out, every thought crashing into the next. The man stepped even closer, now so near that his breath seemed to mix with hers, chilling her to the bone. His voice was a whisper, so quiet it was almost lost in the silence. "You died once, Sarah, and now you're here, and you will die again, and again, and again." The ground beneath her feet rumbled, and the world around her seemed to distort, as though everything she knew, everything she believed, was slipping away into nothingness. "No," Sarah gasped, her voice hoarse with panic.
"No, this isn't real! It can't be real!"
The man's face twisted with dark amusement, his eyes glinting with an unnatural light. "Oh, it's very real, Sarah. But you're never going to escape it. You're part of this world now, and you will never leave." The air thickened, and the world around her seemed to shatter into fragments of light and shadow. The last thing Sarah saw, before everything went black, was the man's face, his smile growing wider, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. And then there was nothing. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, the world around her still and silent. But something was different this time. The air felt thick, as though it was charged with an unsettling energy. Her body felt heavy, her limbs sluggish, as though she had been asleep for far too long. Her first instinct was to sit up, but when she did, her head spun violently, causing her to immediately clutch at the ground for support. The world around her was a strange blur. Dark shapes in the distance, shadows that flickered in and out of view, and the faint, unnatural hum of something she couldn't quite place. Where? What had happened? Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of memories that felt out of place. The man, his eyes, the dark void, his words. The promise of death, or had it been a warning? The last thing she could remember clearly was being in that desolate place, feeling the cold touch of the man's words, and the suffocating pressure of the world around her. And then, blackness. Sarah. Her name echoed through the silence, but it wasn't a voice she recognized. It was distant, distorted, as if coming from everywhere at once. The sound vibrated through her chest, a strange hum that made her teeth ache. She spun around, her heart pounding in her ears. "Sarah, you are awake." The voice again. This time it was clearer, but still unsettling. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as a figure slowly emerged from the shadows. The man. But he looked different. His eyes no longer glowed with that terrifying light, but instead, they were completely black, like endless voids that seemed to suck in all the light around them. His face was expressionless, but there was something more human about him this time. He wasn't the same as before. He was more like her, more like something alive. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What is this?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're awake now," the man said simply, his voice almost gentle, as if he were explaining something mundane. "You've crossed over." Sarah shook her head, her thoughts clouded. Crossed over? What does that mean? Where am I? The man's black eyes bore into hers, his gaze unwavering. "You've been here before, Sarah. But you don't remember, do you? You don't remember any of it." She tried to stand, but her legs wobbled beneath her, as if they had forgotten how to hold her up. Her surroundings were eerily familiar, like a place she had dreamed of once, but could never quite recall. The landscape was vast and empty, stretching endlessly in all directions. But there was something off about it. Something distorted in the way the light flickered, how the shadows seemed to move on their own. "No," Sarah breathed, her voice hoarse. "I don't remember any of this." The man took a slow step toward her, his presence sending a chill down her spine. "You will remember," he said with eerie certainty. "Everything will come back to you. But first, you need to understand the truth." Sarah backed away from him, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't want to hear whatever this man had to say. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape, to find a way out of this nightmare. But there was no way out. Not anymore. "Listen to me, Sarah," the man urged. "You're not the first. You're not the only one. But you are special." She stopped moving, suddenly struck by a terrible sense of dread. "Special? What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "This place, this world. It's not just a place for you to wander through aimlessly. It's a place for those who have crossed over, who have died and returned, each one of them destined for something greater than they can understand." "I'm dead," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. The man nodded slowly, his dark eyes never leaving hers. "Yes, you died. But you were brought back, just like the others." Sarah stumbled back, her hands gripping her head as the weight of his words crashed down on her. She was dead. She couldn't accept it. It couldn't be true. "You're not alive, Sarah," the man continued, his voice low and cold. "Not in the way you think. You're here now, just like the others stuck in this place. The shadows around her shifted, as if responding to his words. The sky, or whatever was above her, seemed to darken, becoming more oppressive with each passing moment. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. "I don't believe you. This isn't real." The man's smile twisted into something cruel. "It's as real as you want it to be." The ground beneath her feet trembled, and suddenly, the scene around her shifted. The once barren landscape began to morph, distorting as if it were made of some liquid substance. She looked around in a panic, trying to understand what was happening. The man reached out a hand, and as he did, the air thickened again, the world around them beginning to unravel. The sky above them tore open, revealing a vast emptiness, an infinite void that seemed to stretch on forever. "This is where the dead wander, Sarah," the man said softly. "This is where you belong. You don't remember, but you will. You'll remember everything." The last thing Sarah saw before the world around her disappeared into the abyss was the man's eyes. Those dark, empty eyes that seemed to devour everything in their gaze. And then, once again, there was nothing. Sarah awoke again, but this time it was different. There was no blinding darkness, no cold emptiness that swallowed her whole. Instead, she found herself standing in what looked like a dense, mist-covered forest. The trees around her were tall and twisted, their bark dark as if scorched by some unseen fire. The air was thick with a strange, metallic scent, and the silence was so profound that even her own breathing seemed too loud. It wasn't just the setting that felt wrong. There was something about the way the fog curled around the trees, how it shifted unnaturally, as if it were alive and watching her. She could feel its presence, like 1,000 eyes were hidden within the mist, observing her every move. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't know where to run. There was no way out, no path to follow, just an endless, disorienting maze of trees and shadows. She glanced behind her, hoping to see some sign of the man, but he was nowhere in sight. "Where are you?" she whispered into the thick fog, her voice trembling. No answer. Panic started to creep in as the realization set in she was alone. Again, her legs shook beneath her, and she had to force herself to move. She didn't know why, but something deep inside her told her to keep walking. That if she stopped, something worse would happen. The thought was absurd, but it felt true nonetheless. As she trudged through the forest, the mist began to swirl around her, thickening, crawling up her legs. The trees seemed to bend toward her, their limbs stretching and twisting as if trying to grasp at her, hold her still. She quickened her pace, the sound of her breath coming out in frantic gasps. Her footsteps echoed in the emptiness, but it wasn't just her footsteps she could hear. There was something else, something lurking just beyond her line of sight. A rustling, a faint scraping sound, as though something was moving in the fog, just out of reach. Sarah's eyes darted around, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was, but all she could see were shadows. Dark, shifting shadows that seemed to multiply the longer she looked. Then, suddenly, a figure appeared in front of her, emerging from the mist like a ghost. It was a woman, tall and gaunt, her long black hair hanging loosely around her face. Her clothes were ragged, torn as if they had been worn for years. But it wasn't the woman's appearance that froze Sarah's blood. It was the way the woman stared at her. Her eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to draw in the light and the world around her. Who are you?" Sarah choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman didn't speak, but instead, she raised a skeletal hand, pointing into the mist. Sarah followed the direction of the finger, her heart skipping a beat when she saw what the woman was pointing at. In the distance, through the fog, stood a large, dark structure. It was an old building, worn down and crumbling, yet it felt somehow alive. There was no light, no sound coming from it. But Sarah knew that it held the answers she was desperately seeking. The woman's eyes never left Sarah's, and for a moment, Sarah felt the weight of something ancient pressing down on her. "Go to it," the woman whispered, her voice a rasping, breathless sound. "It is the only way out." With a chill crawling up her spine, Sarah nodded and began moving toward the building. She couldn't explain why she felt compelled to follow this strange woman's instructions, but some primal instinct told her that this was the only way forward. The fog seemed to grow thicker the closer she got to the building, swallowing the path behind her. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the forest faded away until there was nothing but the sound of her footsteps and her ragged breathing. When she reached the entrance of the structure, she stopped. The door was large and wooden, its surface cracked and weathered with age. There were strange markings etched into the wood, symbols she didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to shift and change when she stared at them for too long. She reached out, hesitated, then pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the emptiness. Beyond the door was a narrow hallway, lit by flickering torches. The walls were covered in strange, faded paintings, paintings of figures she didn't recognize. Their faces distorted in agony, their eyes wide with terror. The air inside smelled of the decay, of something ancient and long forgotten. As Sarah stepped into the hallway, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She didn't know why, but she had the overwhelming sense that this place was alive, that it had been waiting for her. She had heard stories of haunted places, of cursed buildings, but this felt different. This was no ordinary structure. She moved cautiously, every step echoing off the stone walls. The further she walked, the heavier the air became. The oppressive silence was stifling, and the flickering torchlight cast unsettling shadows that seemed to move on their own. At the end of the hallway, she found a door that looked much older than the others. It was covered in the same strange symbols, but this time there was something more. A low hum came from beyond it, a sound that vibrated through the floor beneath her feet, reaching into her bones. Sarah hesitated for a moment before reaching for the handle. It was cold, almost freezing, but she didn't pull her hand away. She was so close. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. What she saw beyond it, it was not what she expected. As the door creaked open, Sarah was met with an overwhelming sense of vertigo. The room beyond was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was vast, stretching infinitely in every direction. Its walls lined with enormous, tarnished mirrors. These mirrors, however, were not the pristine, reflective surfaces she knew from the outside world. Instead, they were warped and cracked, their frames covered in layers of dust, as if they had not been touched in centuries. The hum that had been echoing through the hallway grew louder as she stepped into the room. It was a low, almost melodic sound, but there was an unsettling quality to it, like a lullaby twisted into something sinister. Sarah's heart raced in her chest, her breaths shallow and fast. She stood frozen at the threshold, unsure whether to move forward or turn back. The fog from the forest seemed to follow her into the room, creeping around her feet like an insistent whispering presence. She forced herself to step inside, the floor beneath her feet groaning as if the building itself was alive and reacting to her movements. The moment her foot touched the cold stone floor, the mirrors shifted. At first, it was subtle, a ripple through the glass as if the mirrors were alive, breathing in time with her. But then, one by one, the reflections began to change. The mirrors that had once shown only her image now displayed distorted versions of herself, twisted, grotesque faces that stared back at her with hollow, lifeless eyes. The longer she looked, the more they seemed to move, their mouths stretching into twisted smiles, their eyes following her every move. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She turned away, But the mirrors seemed to follow her, warping, distorting, and showing things she couldn't quite comprehend. For every mirror she passed, a new figure emerged. Figures from her past. Faces of people she had known, people she had lost. But these faces weren't like the ones she remembered. They were disfigured, broken. Their eyes glazed over in a way that made her stomach churn. "Why are you here?" A voice suddenly echoed, sharp and chilling, reverberating off the mirrors. It was not a voice she recognized, but it sounded close, as though it were speaking directly into her ear. She spun around, her heart hammering, but there was no one behind her. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," Sarah whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling. "I just need to get out of here." The hum of the room intensified, growing into a cacophony of whispers and voices, none of which made sense. They overlapped each other, twisting together in a maddening melody, each voice calling out to her, urging her to stay, to listen, to accept whatever this place was offering. But Sarah couldn't stay. She couldn't let herself become one of them. Trapped in this maze of broken reflections and whispers, the mirrors shifted again. This time, the figures they reflected weren't just distortions of herself or her past. They were alive. Figures stepped out from the mirrors, their limbs jerking unnaturally, as though they were struggling to move, their bodies twitching with an unsettling, mechanical precision. Some of them wore familiar faces, people she knew, but their eyes were cold, hollow, empty. Others were strangers, their features obscured by shadows and cracked skin. One of them, a man with a thin, gaping smile and eyes black as coal, stepped toward her. His movements were jerky, unnatural, and his voice rasped as he spoke. "You think you can leave," he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "There is no leaving. Not here." Sarah stumbled back, her breath caught in her throat. She tried to move, to run, but her legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone. She looked around for an exit, but all she saw were more mirrors, more twisted reflections of herself and the others. The man stepped closer, his presence suffocating, his smile widening with each step he took. "This is where they all end up," he said softly, his voice a sickening lullaby. In the mirrors, staring back at themselves, trapped in their own prison. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She realized with horror that the figures, the broken reflections, were not merely distorted images. They were trapped here. People who had once wandered into this place just as she had. They had become part of the mirrors, part of the endless maze. "No," she whispered, backing away. "I don't want to be like them." But the man's smile only grew wider, and the hum of the mirrors grew louder, filling her mind with their twisted melody. The other figures in the room closed in, their hands reaching toward her, their eyes voids of endless darkness. She was surrounded. Her thoughts became a blur as the darkness in the mirrors stretched outward, consuming everything. The last thing she saw before the shadows swallowed her was her own reflection, staring back at her with wide, terrified eyes trapped behind the glass. The hum echoed in her mind, and then silence. When Sarah's eyes fluttered open, the first thing she noticed was the absence of sound. The humming, the whispers, everything that had filled the room was gone. It was as if the mirrors themselves had swallowed it all, leaving her in a suffocating, unnerving quiet. For a moment, she believed she had imagined it. Perhaps it was all just a nightmare. But the coldness that gripped her body, the dim light that flickered in the distance, and the sense of something watching her told her otherwise. She stood, shakily, her knees weak beneath her. Her hands reached out, her fingers brushing against the floor. The stone felt rough and cold, the texture alien under her fingertips. Slowly, she pushed herself up to a sitting position and took in her surroundings. The room that had been filled with mirrors now appeared different. Bare, with walls that were smooth and featureless. There were no reflections anymore. No distorted figures staring back at her. But something was wrong. The air was heavy, oppressive, like the space itself was alive. She glanced around, her eyes landing on a narrow doorway at the far side of the room. It was barely visible, almost hidden in the shadows, as if it had only just appeared. Without thinking, Sarah crawled toward the door, her pulse quickening. She didn't know what she would find on the other side, but she couldn't stay here, not surrounded by the suffocating emptiness. Each movement felt like a battle against some unseen force trying to hold her back. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, winding corridor that stretched into darkness. There was no light beyond the door, but it felt like something was waiting for her down there, just beyond the reach of her senses. A strange sense of urgency gripped her as she stumbled forward into the passage. The walls were damp to the touch, cold and smooth, as if they had never seen the light of day. The air was thick, the darkness wrapping around her like a living thing, smothering her every step. Her breathing was shallow, the sound of her own footsteps echoing off the walls. She didn't know how long she walked, how many turns she made, but the path seemed endless. No matter which direction she took, the darkness stretched on, oppressive and inescapable. Then, she saw it. At the end of the passage, a faint light flickered, barely perceptible at first, but growing stronger with each step she took. Her heart skipped a beat, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Could it be the outside world? Could there finally be an end to this nightmare? She quickened her pace, her breath catching in her throat. The light grew brighter, almost blinding, and before she knew it, she was standing at the entrance of a vast, open room. But it wasn't what she expected. This room was not empty like the one she had just left. It was filled with old furniture, cracked chairs, torn upholstery, broken lamps. But what caught her attention the most was the table in the center of the room. On the table was a strange object, covered in a black cloth. A sense of dread filled her as she approached the table, her every instinct screaming at her to turn around, to leave. But curiosity got the better of her. She reached out and pulled the cloth away. Underneath, there was a mirror. It was a small mirror, no bigger than a hand, but unlike any mirror she had ever seen. The glass was black as night, its surface swirling with shadows that seemed to shift and move on their own. It was not a reflection that stared back at her, but a void, an emptiness so deep it made her stomach churn. She hesitated for a moment, her mind screaming at her to put it down, to leave it where it was. But the pull of the mirror was too strong. She found herself staring into its depths, unable to look away. The shadows within the glass seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Her reflection was not as she knew it. It was warped, distorted, like the figures in the mirrors from before. Her face was twisted into an expression of agony, her eyes wide with terror. "No," she whispered, stepping back from the mirror, but it was too late. The room around her began to tremble. The shadows in the mirror reached out, their tendrils curling, wrapping around her arms, her legs, pulling her closer. She fought against them, but they were too strong. The darkness enveloped her, seeping into her skin, crawling under her flesh, taking root inside her. Her screams were swallowed by the darkness, lost to the endless void. And then, silence. When Sarah's eyes opened once again, the first thing she noticed was the absence of the weight, the suffocating pressure that had been pulling her down. She wasn't in the dark room anymore. She wasn't anywhere, really. It was as though she were floating in the void itself, suspended between dimensions, with nothing to hold on to. The feeling was disorienting. She couldn't feel her body, and yet she could sense everything around her. There was no ground beneath her feet, no air in her lungs, and no light to guide her. It was a place where time didn't seem to exist, where everything was frozen in some kind of endless stasis. As she tried to make sense of the situation, a voice echoed in her mind. It was faint, distant at first, but slowly it grew louder. Sarah, can you hear me?" Her heart raced. The voice was familiar, yet foreign, like a forgotten memory trying to claw its way back to the surface. She strained to focus, the words reverberating in the void, causing the silence around her to crack and splinter. Who is this?" she asked, though she didn't know if she was speaking aloud or if the thought was simply drifting through her mind. The voice responded, this time clearer and with an eerie familiarity. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't want you to get involved." Sarah's pulse quickened, a wave of dread washing over her. The voice belonged to someone she knew, a face she could almost see, but just out of reach. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What is this place?" The voice seemed to hesitate, as if it too wasn't sure how to explain. "It's not a place, exactly. It's more like a gap. A space between what you know and what you've forgotten. You're here because you've crossed the line. You're no longer just a spectator." The words didn't make sense, but there was something in them that sent a cold shiver down her spine. Suddenly, the void around her began to shift. Faint shapes flickered in the distance, like ghosts trying to make themselves known. Sarah's gaze snapped to one of them, and her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the figure. It was her, but not the Sarah she was now. The Sarah she once was. She reached out, but the figure disappeared as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind nothing but the same oppressive darkness. A new voice cut through the stillness, different from the first, more distorted, as though it was coming from deep within the void itself. "You shouldn't be here, Sarah. You're not ready. You've seen too much, and now you'll never escape." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "The mirrors have seen you. They know who you are, and now they won't let you leave. You're part of their story now, just like the others before you." The words echoed in her mind like a cursed chant, a warning, a prophecy. Before she could speak again, the darkness seemed to swell, closing in around her. "You'll never wake up," the distorted voice continued. "This place is your prison. It's where forgotten souls go to rest or to suffer. And you, Sarah, are one of them now." The ground beneath her began to form, solidifying in places as if it were being constructed from the darkness itself. The walls came into focus slowly, towering and cold, each one lined with mirrors that reflected not her face, but an endless procession of lost souls. Faces she did not recognize, twisted in expressions of pain and fear, all staring back at her with hollow, pleading eyes. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to step away from the mirrors, but there was nowhere to go. She was surrounded, trapped by her own reflection and the unseen forces of the place. "You can try to run," the voice warned, "but you'll always end up here, in the same place, staring into the same mirrors." Sarah's mind reeled. She remembered the mirrors in the previous room, the ones that had reflected distorted images, shadows of something else. But this was different. This was real. These were real souls, trapped within their own reflections, cursed to relive their final moments for eternity. "No," she whispered, backing away. "This can't be real. There has to be a way out." The voices grew louder, overlapping a cacophony of despair. "There is no way out. There never was." And then, in the silence that followed, a new voice emerged. This one was soft, almost tender, but there was a sense of familiarity to it. It was the voice from before, the one that had been speaking to her in the void. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I never wanted this, but you have to know the truth. The mirrors, they never forget. They never forgive. And now, they're watching you." Suddenly, the mirrors began to shimmer, the surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen hand. From within the glass, shadows stretched out, reaching for her, pulling her toward them. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she fought to stay upright, her hands pressed against the cold walls, desperately trying to break free. But the mirrors were too powerful, their pull too strong. The darkness around her thickened, suffocating her with each passing second. And then, just as she felt herself being pulled into the mirrors, consumed by the shadows within, the darkness itself seemed to dissolve, like a curtain being pulled away. She gasped, her chest rising and falling in frantic breaths, and opened her eyes. The harsh light of the early morning sun cut through Sarah's eyelids, pulling her from the deep, suffocating grip of the void. She blinked rapidly, disoriented, as the world around her slowly came into focus. The familiar sound of birds chirping and the rustle of leaves in the wind filled her ears. She was outside, lying on the ground, the cool earth beneath her. But everything felt wrong. The weight in her chest hadn't lifted, it had only transformed. Her breath was shallow, her limbs unsteady. She sat up, wiping her face with her hands, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had been in the mirrors. She had heard the voices. She had been trapped in that cold, empty place, floating between reality and something else. But now, it was as if none of it had ever happened. The forest stretched out before her, as peaceful and serene as it always had been. The trees stood tall and strong, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Yet, the nagging sense of dread lingered, like a shadow clinging to her soul. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the fog of confusion, but the sense of being watched persisted. Slowly, she stood up, scanning the area. Everything appeared normal, too normal. The path that led deeper into the woods was still there, winding through the trees as if inviting her to continue. But she knew better now. She turned away from the path, taking a few steps back toward the campfire they had built last night. But the moment she moved, her gaze shifted to something that made her blood run cold. The trees, the ground, the very air around her had changed. The familiar campsite, her friends, the warmth of the fire, the joy of the evening, was gone. Instead, there was only the remains of something broken. The remnants of their tents, crushed underfoot, the fire pit smoldering with ashes that had long been abandoned. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend the impossible. Had everything been a dream? Or had it all been some twisted prelude to something much worse? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps in the distance reached her ears. She froze, her heart racing. Slowly, she turned toward the noise. A figure emerged from the trees, their outline blurred and indistinct, as if they didn't belong in this world. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the figure came into sharper focus. It was him, Ethan. Her stomach twisted into knots at the sight of him. Ethan was supposed to be gone. He had vanished into the night, leaving only his abandoned gear behind. But here he was, walking toward her, his eyes empty and cold. Ethan. Sarah's voice trembled as she took a cautious step forward. He didn't respond. He just kept walking, his face expressionless, his movements stiff and unnatural. It was as though he was being controlled, like a puppet with no strings. She reached out to him, desperate for any sign of recognition, but before she could touch him, he stopped in his tracks, his head jerking up as if he had heard something. For a split second, his eyes locked with hers, deep, lifeless pools of darkness. A flicker of something passed between them, something she couldn't quite place, but then he turned and began walking away again. Ethan, wait. She called out, her voice rising in panic. But he didn't turn around. He continued walking into the woods, disappearing between the trees, leaving Sarah standing there, her chest tight, her mind spinning with questions. Something was terribly wrong. Without thinking, Sarah rushed after him, her feet pounding against the earth as she pushed through the thick underbrush. The forest seemed to close in around her, the path becoming narrower, more twisted with each step. She could hear the wind rustling the leaves, but there was something else, something faint, like a distant whisper. Ethan, please, she muttered under her breath, but the words felt hollow, as though they carried no weight. The forest became darker, the trees closing in, their branches clawing at her arms as she ran. It was as if the woods themselves were conspiring against her, pushing her further into their depths. Then she heard it, a voice, soft, distant, calling her name. Sarah. Sarah. It wasn't Ethan's voice. It was the voice from before, the one that had guided her in the void, the one that had warned her. No, Sarah whispered, shaking her head. I don't want to hear this again. But the voice persisted, growing louder with each step she took, now mingling with the whispers of the trees, the groaning of the earth beneath her. You shouldn't have followed him. You shouldn't have come back. The voice sounded almost mournful. But there was something else in it, something menacing, something that made her skin crawl. You're not safe, Sarah, the voice continued. Not anymore. You're not meant to be here. Not in this place, not in this world. The ground beneath her feet suddenly gave way, and she found herself stumbling, falling. She reached out, grabbing onto a nearby tree, but her hand slipped. The world around her spun as she fell deeper into the earth, into a darkness that swallowed everything whole. Her mind screamed for her to wake up, but it was already too late. The world was nothing but a blur of darkness and twisted shapes. Sarah's body was weightless, her mind spinning in an endless spiral, desperately trying to grasp something solid. She couldn't breathe, she couldn't see. Every part of her screamed in terror, but no sound escaped her lips. It felt like she was falling forever, plunging into an abyss with no end. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. She slammed into something cold and unforgiving, stone, perhaps, or some other unyielding surface. The force of the impact took her breath away, and for a moment, all she could do was lie there, gasping, her body aching from the fall. Slowly, her senses returned. The dark fog that had clouded her mind began to clear, and she realized with a shock that she was no longer in the forest. The air around her was damp, heavy with the smell of decay. The faint sound of dripping water echoed through the silence, and a chill seeped into her bones. Sarah pushed herself up from the ground, her hands scraping against rough stone. She could barely make out her surroundings, but there was a strange, unnatural glow in the distance. A faint, sickly light that seemed to pulse with a rhythm of its own. She stood, her knees wobbling with each step, and slowly made her way toward the eerie light. Her mind was racing, her thoughts a tangled mess. Where was she? What had happened? Had everything that occurred so far been real, or was this just another twisted illusion? The light grew stronger as she moved closer, and she finally found herself standing before an enormous stone archway. It was old, ancient, covered in moss and grime, its surface slick with the remnants of centuries of neglect. The light seemed to emanate from the arch itself, casting an unsettling glow across the cavernous space beyond. Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward. Her heart pounded in her chest as she crossed the threshold, her footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. The air inside was thick, almost suffocating, and it tasted metallic on her tongue. The cavern stretched out before her, vast and endless. Jagged rock formations jutted out from the ground, some resembling twisted shapes, human, like figures, distorted and frozen in time. They seemed to watch her as she moved, their eyes hollow, their faces contorted in grotesque expressions of pain. As she ventured deeper, the path narrowed, forcing her to crouch to avoid the sharp edges of the rock above. The walls of the cavern seemed to close in around her, as though the very structure of the place was shifting, tightening like a noose. The whispers returned. Sarah, Sarah. The voice was soft, almost sweet, but there was an unmistakable edge to it now, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. She looked around, her heart racing. The cavern had changed. The air was thick with a strange energy, a heaviness that pressed against her chest. It felt like something was watching her from the shadows, something that was waiting for the right moment to strike. "Who's there?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" There was a long pause. Then, the voice replied, this time louder, more insistent. "You shouldn't have followed. You shouldn't have tried to escape." Sarah's stomach twisted. She could hear something moving in the dark, a rustling sound coming from all directions. The air grew colder, and her breath formed a cloud in front of her. "Escape?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "From what?" The voice laughed, a low, guttural laugh that sent chills crawling up her spine. "You haven't escaped, Sarah. You never will." A sudden, sharp noise pierced the silence, like the cracking of a whip. Sarah jumped, her heart pounding as she spun around. But there was nothing, no one. The walls of the cavern seemed to close in even further, and the ground beneath her feet began to tremble. It was as if the very earth was alive, reacting to something she couldn't see. Then, through the shadows, she saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, its form twisted and inhuman. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs elongated, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were nothing more than hollow sockets, black and empty. The thing moved toward her with unnatural speed, its feet barely touching the ground as it floated, a dark, shadowy wraith. It reached out with skeletal hands, its fingers stretching impossibly long, grasping for her. "No!" Sarah cried out, stumbling backward. She turned and ran, her feet slipping on the wet stone beneath her. She had to get away, had to escape this nightmare. But the path seemed to stretch on forever, leading her deeper into the bowels of the cavern. The thing was gaining on her. She could hear its raspy breath, its hollow steps echoing behind her. Relentless and cold. She couldn't outrun it. There was no escape. The voice returned, louder now, surrounding her. "You've always been part of this place. You can't leave. You can't run." Her lungs burned as she sprinted, her vision blurring, the cavern spinning around her. But no matter how fast she ran, the thing behind her was always there, always closer. Its cold, skeletal fingers were inches from her back when, suddenly, everything stopped. The cavern went deathly silent. The air was still, thick with tension. Sarah stood frozen, her body trembling, her chest heaving. She dared not move, not even to breathe. Then, a voice so quiet it barely reached her ears, whispered through the stillness. "You're not alone. Sarah, you never were." A figure stepped out of the darkness, this one familiar, Ethan. His eyes were empty, just like the others. He was a shadow of the person he once was, his face pale, his body stiff. He reached out for her. "No!" Sarah shouted, recoiling in fear. But Ethan's hand reached her, cold and lifeless, and as she touched him, the world around her shattered, breaking apart like glass, splintering into a million pieces. And in the silence, she heard one final whisper. "Welcome home." The ground gave way beneath Sarah's feet, and the world around her imploded. She felt the familiar sensation of falling again, but this time there was no impact, no solid ground to crash into. She was suspended in a dark void, drifting through an endless abyss. The whispers had returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. Some were familiar, Ethan's voice, her own voice, distorted and mangled. Others were completely unknown, alien, like the sound of people speaking in a language she couldn't understand. "Sarah, Sarah, you can't escape. Never escape." She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her body felt weightless, as though she was trapped between two worlds, caught in a space that didn't belong to either. The voices were all around her, swirling and tugging at her consciousness, trying to pull her into something deeper. Then, out of the darkness, a figure materialized. At first, it was nothing but a silhouette, a shape standing in the distance. As it grew closer, Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The figure was tall, towering above her, and its face was obscured by a thick, hooded cloak. The air around it seemed to ripple, distorting the space like heat rising off the pavement. "Who are you?" Sarah managed to choke out, her voice sounding thin and distant. She didn't know if it was even her speaking anymore, or if the words were coming from somewhere far off, outside of her control. The figure said nothing. It just stood there, silent and still, its presence alone sending a wave of dread through Sarah's chest. Slowly, the figure lifted its hood, revealing its face. Her blood ran cold. The face was her own. Or rather, it was something twisted, something wrong. Her own features were distorted, her eyes hollow and sunken, her skin stretched tight over a skull. It was as though someone had taken her reflection and bent it, until it no longer resembled her, until it became a grotesque mockery. "No," Sarah whispered, her legs shaking as she took a step back. "This can't be me. This isn't real." The figure smiled, a wide, cruel grin that stretched unnaturally across its face. The smile was too wide, too sharp, its teeth too white and too perfect, gleaming in the darkness. "It's real, Sarah. It's all real," the figure said, its voice a distorted version of her own. "You are here, and you have always been here." "Why?" Sarah gasped, her chest tightening. "Why is this happening? What do you want from me?" The figure tilted its head as though considering her words. "I don't want anything from you," it replied, its voice tinged with cold amusement. "I've been waiting for you. You're the one who wants something from me." Sarah blinked, confusion flooding her mind. What do you mean?" The figure stepped closer, its presence suffocating, its gaze burning into her. "You've been searching for answers, haven't you? Trying to understand why this is happening, why you're trapped here, why everything is falling apart. But you're looking in the wrong places. The answers are inside you, Sarah. Always have been." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Inside me, what does that mean?" The figure reached out, its cold hand brushing against her cheek. "It means you are part of this place. You've always been part of it." The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. Her body went rigid, her mind struggling to process what the figure had said. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "What do you mean? I don't belong here. I don't belong in this place." The figure smiled again, a terrible, mocking smile. "That's where you're wrong. You've always belonged here, Sarah. You were brought here for a reason. This place, the darkness, the whispers, the nightmares, it's all a part of you. You've been running from it, fighting it, but you can't escape yourself." Her head was spinning. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to move. The figure's words were like poison, seeping into her soul, wrapping around her mind and squeezing. "You're the one who called it here." The figure continued, its voice cold and detached. "You opened the door, Sarah. You brought the darkness into your world, and now you can't close it again." Sarah stumbled backward, her hands reaching out as if to push the figure away. No, I didn't.
I never meant for this to happen. I didn't know what I was doing."
The figure stepped closer, its form looming over her. "You didn't know, but you've always known, haven't you? Deep down, you've always known the truth. The darkness was waiting for you. It's always been waiting for you." The ground beneath her feet trembled again, and Sarah stumbled, her knees giving way. She fell to the ground, gasping for air, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure knelt beside her, its hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Sarah," it said, its voice a whisper now, a deadly promise. "You never were." The air grew heavy, and Sarah felt the darkness close and around her once more. It wasn't just the cavern anymore. It wasn't just this place. The darkness had followed her, had been inside her all along. "You've always been a part of this," the figure repeated, its voice fading into the darkness. "And now, you always will be." Sarah awoke with a jolt, her breath ragged and shallow. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was. The feeling of cold, damp air, and the distant echoes of whispers tugged at her mind, but the shadows seemed less oppressive now. She was lying on the hard earth, her back pressed against something cold and metallic. As she slowly sat up, she realized with horror that she was no longer in the cavern. The place around her was unfamiliar, vast, and alien. The air was thick with the smell of rust oil and something decayed. She was in some kind of abandoned industrial site. The floor beneath her was cracked concrete, and the walls loomed tall, covered in dark, peeling paint. Broken machinery lay scattered around the area, abandoned as though it had been left to rot for years. But it was the silence that unsettled her the most. There were no voices here, no whispers, no haunting echoes of the figure. The stillness was almost worse than the noise, as if she had stepped into some desolate place between worlds. A place where nothing could escape and nothing could reach her. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice shaky as she stood up and glanced around. Her heart was pounding in her chest as her eyes darted across the room. The walls were lined with strange, jagged markings, symbols that twisted and turned, their meanings impossible to decipher. She reached out to touch one of them, but the moment her fingers brushed the surface, a searing pain shot through her arm. She recoiled, clutching her wrist. Something was wrong with this place. It wasn't just abandoned, it was cursed. The sudden rush of memories hit her. Ethan's disappearance, the figure that had looked like her. The realization that the darkness had been a part of her all along. She had tried to escape, to run from whatever this was. But now, it seemed she had only moved deeper into its grasp. She stumbled backward, her feet echoing in the empty space. The sound was jarring, like a knife cutting through the silence. Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. But all she could do was cling to the last bit of hope that maybe she was dreaming. That maybe this was some kind of nightmare she could wake up from. But the sense of reality pressing against her was far too strong. The cold, the pain, the feeling of being trapped in a place that had no beginning and no end. It all felt too real. Suddenly, a sound broke through the silence, a low, rumbling growl that echoed from deep within the dark halls of the industrial site. Sarah froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was followed by another, louder this time, the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, moving toward her. She turned, her eyes scanning the darkness, but she saw nothing. The growl echoed again, this time much closer, and Sarah's blood ran cold. It was coming from behind her, from the far corner of the room, where the shadows seemed thickest. The air around her began to grow colder, and the sense of dread settled deeper into her bones. Without thinking, she broke into a run, her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls as she fled toward the only exit she could see, a narrow door at the far end of the room. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her legs burning with each stride. But the growl grew louder, and now she could hear the scraping of claws against metal. Something was following her. Sarah slammed into the door, pushing it open with all her strength. The door creaked and groaned, but it held. She stumbled out into a long, narrow hallway, her pulse racing. The growl had stopped. But she could feel the presence of something lurking just out of sight. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she couldn't bring herself to look back. The hallway stretched on, illuminated by flickering lights overhead that barely held the shadows at bay. She had no idea where she was going, or even if she was heading towards safety, but she had no choice but to keep moving. As she turned a corner, a strange sensation washed over her. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, and the walls seemed to pulse, like the entire building was alive. She blinked, and the lights flickered again, casting erratic shadows across the space. In that split second, she thought she saw something moving in the corner of her eye, something large and monstrous just out of her reach. Then the growl returned, louder now, closer. She ran faster, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her legs aching with exhaustion. But no matter how fast she ran, the girl was always just behind her, never fading, always there. Sarah's mind was spiraling. The air felt thick, suffocating. Every step she took only seemed to lead her deeper into the maze of this place. The dark corridors that twisted and turned like a living thing. The growl echoed again, and she could feel its hot breath against her skin, like something was breathing down her neck. She didn't dare look back. The hall ahead opened into a wide chamber, an empty space that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls of the chamber were lined with more strange symbols, and in the center of the room was a massive, blackened altar. The altar was made of stone, its surface covered in ancient runes and carvings that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. And there, standing in front of it, was the figure that looked like her. Sarah froze in place. Her blood ran cold. The figure was still cloaked, but now it turned slowly, revealing its face. It was her face. The twisted, hollow version she had seen before. "You're too late," the figure said, its voice a cold whisper that echoed through the vast room. "This is where it ends." Sarah took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. No, I can't let this be the end." The figure smiled. "You don't have a choice." As it spoke, the ground beneath her feet began to tremble once more. The growl returned, louder, deeper now, shaking the walls, and from the shadows, something else emerged. Something far worse than she could have imagined. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as the thing stepped into the dim light of the chamber. It was enormous, far too large for its shadow to match, and its form was an unsettling blend of animal and something inhuman. Its skin was slick and glistened like wet stone, stretched tightly over muscular limbs that ended in claws sharp enough to rip through steel. Its eyes, however, were what truly paralyzed her. Black, bottomless pits that seemed to draw everything into them, devouring the very light around it. The creature's growl vibrated through Sarah's chest, filling her with an overwhelming sense of dread. She knew instinctively that it wasn't a simple beast. It was something ancient, something beyond comprehension, and it was there for her. But the figure, the twisted version of herself, did not move, standing like a dark sentinel before the altar, watching the creature approach with a strange calm. As it neared, Sarah's thoughts raced, desperate for a way out. Her eyes darted around the chamber, but there was no escape. The only way forward was past the creature, and she wasn't sure if she could even make it. "You are the key," the figure's voice hissed, breaking through her panic. "The cycle can only be completed with you." Sarah's breath caught. The words felt like a slap to her face, but she didn't understand them. What did it mean by the cycle? What role had she played in all of this? And why her? The creature's eyes flicked to Sarah, and it growled in response to the figure's words. Its body rippled, its muscles tense as if preparing for something. Sarah took a step back instinctively, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she almost choked on the fear that gripped her throat. The figure laughed softly, an eerie sound that reverberated off the chamber walls. "You've always been a part of it, Sarah. The darkness, the terror, the creature. It's all bound to you." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the growl of the creature. "I never asked for any of this. You didn't have to," the figure replied, its face twisting into a cruel smile. "It's been within you all along. You were chosen long before you even knew it." The creature moved forward then, its massive feet thundering against the ground. It was no longer just a thing of shadow. It was a force of nature, unstoppable and unforgiving. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth, dripping with saliva as it loomed closer. Sarah backed away slowly, her mind racing. Her body felt paralyzed by fear, but some primal part of her urged her to move, to run, to fight back. Then, out of nowhere, a burst of pain shot through her chest. She gasped, her body seizing as something deep within her seemed to stir, awaken. Her eyes widened as her fingers brushed against her skin, where the pain emanated from. There, beneath her clothes, her skin was shifting, changing, like something inside her was tearing through. "Do you feel it?" the figure asked, its voice a low, mocking tone. "The transformation is beginning. The cycle is complete." Sarah's breath became ragged, her body racked with spasms, as if something inside her was forcing its way to the surface. The creature drew closer, its eyes burning with hunger. The altar, now glowing faintly with an eerie blue light, seemed to call to her, pulling at her very soul. But as Sarah stumbled backward, a sudden, unexplainable surge of energy coursed through her. It was as though a barrier, a wall within her, shattered. A rush of power exploded through her body, and for the briefest moment, she could feel it. The essence of the darkness she had been running from. It was hers. The creature screeched in agony, its massive form recoiling as if struck by an invisible force. Sarah didn't know how she was doing it, how she was summoning this power, but it was undeniable. The air crackled with energy, and she could feel the darkness responding to her will. She reached out, and the creature snarled, its glowing eyes narrowing with hatred. It lunged at her with a speed that took her breath away, its claws aimed for her throat. But in a desperate motion, Sarah raised her hand, her eyes widening as an unnatural force pulsed from her palm. The creature froze midair, suspended in time. Its body writhed against the invisible barrier, but it couldn't break free. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps as she felt the power surge within her. It was too much to control, too overwhelming, and yet it was undeniable. The power was hers. "Let it go, Sarah," the figure whispered, its voice a dark, coaxing lullaby. "It's not meant to be stopped. The cycle must finish. You must finish it. Finish it." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper.
Finish what? I don't even know what's happening.
The figure moved closer, its eyes locked on hers, filled with cold, malevolent knowledge. "You were chosen, Sarah. Your existence is tied to this place, to this creature, to this curse. You cannot escape it. You never could."
"No,"
Sarah shouted, her voice cracking with desperation.
"I'm not a part of this."
"I never was." The creature howled again, breaking free from the invisible force that had held it back. It lunged once more, its massive form crashing toward her. But this time, Sarah was ready. She focused all of her will into one final push, her hand outstretched. The creature screamed in agony as an explosion of energy erupted from her palm, sending it flying backward, its body slamming into the stone walls of the chamber. The echoes of its pain reverberated through the room, and for a moment, Sarah felt a strange calm wash over her. She had done it. She had stopped the creature. But at what cost? The figure, still standing by the altar, clapped slowly, its mocking smile never faltering. "Well done, Sarah. You've proven your worth." Sarah's legs buckled beneath her, her body trembling as she struggled to breathe. The power within her was overwhelming, threatening to consume her entirely. It was all too much. The darkness, the creature, the twisted figure of herself. She had no answers, no way to make sense of what was happening. All she knew was that she was trapped in a place where nothing made sense, and everything was out of her control. And somewhere, deep within her, the darkness was waiting. Sarah's head swam as she struggled to steady her breath. She had never felt anything like this before. The surge of power that now thrummed beneath her skin was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was as if the very air around her had changed, charged with a tangible energy that made the walls of the chamber pulse and hum in response. The creature, though still clearly dazed by the force she had unleashed, was already stirring. Its massive body twitched, its claws scraping against the stone floor as it began to push itself up, growling low and deep. Sarah's eyes locked onto it, her pulse quickening, but the terror was now mixed with something else. something darker. The figure of herself, the twisted, distorted reflection that had been speaking to her, had not moved. It stood there, still as a statue, its black eyes never leaving Sarah's face, and yet the air felt heavier now, more oppressive. "You are stronger than you know," the figure said softly, its voice no longer mocking, but almost admiring. "This power, this force, it was always a part of you. You just had to realize it. Realize it." Sarah gasped, her voice strained. "What are you talking about? What is this power?" The figure smiled, a slow, cruel smile that made Sarah's stomach twist. "The cycle was always meant to end with you. You are not just a part of it. You are the culmination of it." "I don't understand." Sarah's voice trembled as she took a step back, her eyes flicking between the figure and the creature that was now fully standing, its glowing eyes narrowed in fury. "What cycle? What do you mean?" "The curse," the figure said, its voice colder now. "It's not just something that happens to people. It's something that exists, something that was bound to this place long before you even came here. The creature, the altar, the very darkness that surrounds you, it was all part of the plan, your plan." Sarah's blood ran cold at the words. Her mind was racing, but she couldn't make sense of what was happening. A part of her wanted to deny it, to turn away, but something deep within her, the same force that had erupted in her a moment ago, was demanding her attention. "You were born to break the cycle," the figure continued, its tone almost reverent. "But in breaking it, you will become a part of it. You will complete what has been started." The creature roared in the background, its massive form still shifting with menace. Sarah's eyes locked onto it again. The thing wasn't just a creature of flesh and bone. It was something more, something older and more dangerous. A force of nature, a living manifestation of the curse. And yet, despite its fearsome appearance, it seemed to be nothing more than a servant to something much darker. "What do I have to do?" Sarah's voice was shaky as she faced the twisted version of herself, desperate for answers. "How do I stop this?" The figure's smile widened, revealing sharp teeth that glinted in the faint light of the chamber. "You can't stop it, Sarah. You can only complete it. You must accept your fate. You must embrace the power inside you." The air felt thick now, as if the very atmosphere was closing in on her, suffocating her. The creature's growl was louder, its steps slower as it approached her once again, its claws scraping against the ground like the sound of nails on a chalkboard. Every instinct within Sarah screamed for her to run, but she couldn't move. The weight of the figure's words was too much to bear. "Accept it," the figure whispered, its voice like a soft caress. "Embrace it. It's already inside you." The room seemed to twist, and Sarah's vision blurred as the world around her began to shift. Time itself seemed to slow as the power within her flared, overwhelming her senses. She could feel the darkness creeping up from within, consuming her thoughts, drowning out everything else. The creature's growl faded, replaced by a rising, deafening roar that filled her ears. "Do you feel it?" the figure asked, its tone almost a lullaby. "It's part of you now. You are part of it." Sarah's body trembled as the force inside her surged, and for the first time, she understood. The power wasn't just something she could control. It was her. It had always been a part of her, buried deep within her, waiting to be awakened. Her breath caught as the realization hit her. She was the curse. She was the key, and she had no idea how to escape it. The creature lunged forward once more, its massive form crashing toward her with terrifying speed. But this time, Sarah didn't move. She couldn't. Her body was no longer her own. The power inside her had taken control, twisting her into something else. With a scream, Sarah thrust her hands forward, and the room exploded in light. The light was blinding, a fierce, pulsating glow that seemed to stretch the very fabric of reality itself. Sarah's mind was consumed by it, her body both weightless and heavy. As though she were being pulled apart and remade in an instant, the power that had erupted within her was no longer just an inner force. It was everything. It was the air, the earth, the very pulse of life itself. The creature's roar was drowned out by the sound of rushing wind, the force of it shaking the ground beneath her feet. Sarah couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything but the thunderous beat of her own heart and the rushing tide of power inside her. She could feel the walls of the chamber closing in, yet they were also fading, disappearing, as if the room itself were being rewritten by the force she had unleashed. For a moment, it was as if the world had stopped moving altogether, frozen in time. Then, just as suddenly, the light vanished and Sarah was back in the chamber, her feet planted firmly on the stone floor. The creature was gone. She blinked, her senses reeling, and when her eyes focused, she saw the figure again. But this time, it was different. The twisted version of herself stood not in the shadows, but in the center of the room, bathed in the same eerie glow that had consumed the space just moments before. Its eyes, those black, endless pits, were fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You've done it," the figure said, its voice low and almost reverent. "You've unlocked the power. The curse is no longer just something that controls you. It is you. And you are it." Sarah shook her head, her thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. The light, the power, what had happened, the creature, the altar, the twisted version of herself, it all seemed to blur together in her mind, indistinguishable from one another. It was as if reality itself was breaking down, fracturing into pieces. "No," Sarah said, her voice hoarse, as if it had been pulled from deep within her. I didn't want this. I just wanted to stop it." The figure's smile twisted into something almost sympathetic, but the eyes, those cold, empty eyes, remained unmoved. "You never had a choice, Sarah. The moment you set foot in this place, you sealed your fate. You were always meant to become the vessel. The curse didn't choose you. You chose it." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she staggered back, her mind struggling to comprehend them. She had come here to end this, to break free from whatever darkness had taken root in her life. And yet, now she was the darkness. She was the very thing she had feared. The creature's growl suddenly echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder that it was still there, lurking, waiting. The sound sent a ripple of fear through Sarah's chest, but it wasn't just fear. It was something more. A gnawing hunger that pulsed through her veins like a living thing. "What do I do now?" Sarah whispered, the question barely escaping her lips. "You embrace what you are," the figure said simply. "You complete the transformation. You become the power, not just a vessel for it." Sarah's heart raced. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be this thing. But as she stood there, the weight of her reality crashing down on her, she realized the terrifying truth. There was no escaping it. The power was inside her, coursing through her blood. And the more she fought against it, the stronger it became. It was a force far greater than anything she had ever encountered. "You cannot fight what you are," the figure continued. "You were born for this. You were chosen." The room seemed to warp again, the walls twisting and bending as though they were alive. The air grew colder, and Sarah felt the creeping sensation of something moving within her, beneath her skin. She could almost hear it. Whispers, distant and faint, as though an entire army of voices was speaking to her, guiding her, pushing her toward something she couldn't understand. But she could feel it, the pull of the power. The darkness was seductive, its call undeniable. For a moment, Sarah's resolve wavered. The whispers grew louder, urging her to give in, to accept the truth. It was so easy, so tempting, to let go and surrender to the force inside her, to become one with it. She could feel the power rising in her, the flood of it filling every fiber of her being. And yet, somewhere deep within her, a small, fragile part of her still resisted. A part of her that wanted to fight, that wanted to run away, to tear herself free from this nightmare. But could she? Could she ever escape what had been set in motion? Could she ever truly break free from the curse that had been woven into her very existence? As the creature's growl echoed once more, closer now, Sarah knew that she had no choice but to confront it. Whatever she had become, whatever she was about to become, it was her only way forward. The cycle had to end. But how? Her body surged with energy once again, and before she could stop herself, she reached out with her hands, her fingers glowing with the same eerie light that had consumed the room earlier. And the darkness answered. The ground beneath Sarah's feet trembled, as if the earth itself was recoiling from the power coursing through her veins. The air had thickened, almost suffocating, as though the very atmosphere was being twisted by the force she had just unleashed. The creature's growl had now become a feral, guttural roar, echoing through the chamber, reverberating in the deepest corners of her mind. She was no longer sure what was real. What had once been a fight for survival had evolved into something far darker. The cursed power she had once feared was now woven into her very essence, and in that moment, she knew she could never escape it. She was the curse. She was the darkness, and it was her. The figure, the twisted version of herself, had faded into the shadows, its eerie eyes still watching, waiting. Sarah could feel its presence, the remnants of it lingering in the air like a memory she couldn't shake, but she couldn't focus on that now. The creature was here. It was real, and it was coming for her. Her pulse raced as her hands crackled with the raw energy of the curse. She could feel the power thrumming beneath her skin, pushing against her, urging her to let go. She had no control over it anymore. The dark force inside her was like a living entity, pulling her in every direction at once, urging her to embrace it fully. But Sarah couldn't let go. Not completely. She couldn't let the darkness consume her, no matter how powerful it was. There had to be a way to stop it. There had to be a way to end this nightmare. The creature's roar grew louder, and Sarah spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. It was close. Too close. She could feel its breath on the back of her neck, the cold, deathly chill of it seeping into her bones. She lifted her hands, her fingers trembling as the cursed energy swirled around her. She could sense the creature's form now, its twisted, monstrous shape emerging from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. It moved with terrifying speed, its movements a blur as it lunged toward her. In that instant, Sarah made a choice. The darkness inside her, the power she had unlocked, it was not her enemy. It was a tool, a weapon. She had to wield it, not be consumed by it. She wasn't just a victim of the curse. She was its master. With a primal scream, Sarah unleashed the full force of the power within her. Her hands shot forward, sending a blinding wave of energy crashing into the creature. The impact was like an explosion, the force of it shaking the very foundations of the chamber. The creature staggered back, its screeching roar filled with rage and pain. It recoiled from the blast, its grotesque form writhing as though it were caught in a storm of raw power. For a brief moment, Sarah saw its true face, twisted and deformed, a mass of shifting shadows and jagged teeth. It was a reflection of her own inner darkness, a manifestation of everything she had feared. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was in control. The creature screeched again, its claws slashing through the air, but Sarah was ready. She met its assault head on, her hands glowing with the cursed energy as she blocked each of its strikes. She felt the weight of the curse pushing against her, but she no longer felt helpless against it. The energy was hers to command, and she used it to her advantage. With each blow she struck, the creature howled in pain, its form beginning to disintegrate into shadow. The darkness that had once consumed her was now unraveling, piece by piece, as she drove the creature back. She could feel its power waning, its hold over her slipping away. But just as she thought victory was within her grasp, the creature lunged again, faster than before. Its claws scraped across her chest, tearing through her skin with an agonizing sting. Sarah staggered back, pain shooting through her body. She could feel the blood dripping from her wound, but she refused to give in. She pressed her hands to her chest, drawing the cursed energy inward, focusing it into a single point. The room grew colder, the shadows deepened, and the air hummed with the tension of an impending final strike. With a defiant cry, Sarah unleashed everything she had left. A blast of pure, raw energy shot from her hands, enveloping the creature in a blinding light. The impact was deafening, and for a moment, Sarah felt as though the entire world was crumbling around her. When the light faded, the creature was gone. The chamber was silent, still, empty. Sarah stood in the center of the room, her chest heaving as the remnants of the cursed power settled inside her. She had done it. She had defeated the creature. But the victory felt hollow. The curse was still a part of her. The power was still inside her. She collapsed to her knees, exhaustion flooding her body. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to process what had just happened. The chamber was quiet now, but Sarah knew the truth. This wasn't over. The darkness was still within her, and no matter how much she had fought it, it was never truly going to leave. The power, the curse, it was her now, and she would have to live with it. But in that moment, as she knelt in the silence of the chamber, Sarah made a vow to herself. She would not be consumed by it. She would not let it control her. Somehow, she would find a way to live with the darkness. And in the end, she would be the one in control.